The third quarter of the 20th century witnessed rapid improvements in health and survival around the world, driven above all by efforts at disease control and better sanitation led by the new World Health Organization, in the spirit of international cooperation exemplified by the new United Nations. Death rates fell dramatically in most countries, even though birth rates remained at previous high levels supported by traditional pronatal cultures. This new imbalance between high birth rates and low death rates translated into extremely rapid population growth, obviously unsustainable over the long term. Rapid population growth created global concern about what some scholars even called a population bomb. One response to the sudden explosion of world population appeared as an international movement spearheaded by groups including the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation. The movement eventually became known as the International Planned Parenthood Federation, with parallel groups within individual countries, including the Planned Parenthood Federation in the United States. Many national governments around the world adopted programs of support for such groups, and the United Nations also became involved in furthering the aims of Planned Parenthood and family planning as a policy strategy. As a demographer, Charlie Nam found himself drawn into this emerging preoccupation with rapid population growth and creating schemes to bring down traditionally high birth rates to match the new reality of low death rates.
Well, in the late 1970s, with fertility still high in many places, there was interest in programs to reduce fertility. One of these programs had to do with educating the public about the need to restrict fertility through educational processes. It acquired the title Population Education. Population education was to be directed to adults. Some countries established such programs, and these programs had some effect, but at a minimal level.
The contribution that he was most qualified to make came from his professional concentration on measurement and analysis of education. By the late 1970s, after a decade at Florida State, he began to participate in the international dialogue about the role of education in shaping the attitudes and behavior of people, especially women, about family formation and the number of children they would have. The first of these international workshops he attended took place in Nairobi, Kenya in 1978, just as Kenya was completing a national survey of women's attitudes and behavior. That survey became part of the worldwide series known as the World Fertility Surveys.
When I was in Kenya in 1978 and giving some consultation to the demographers there, I got the idea for broadening the educational approach, and I presented a draft of this article to a group of Kenyan demographers and students. In 1979, I was invited to participate in a methodological workshop on the comparative study of women's education and fertility at UNESCO in Paris. I presented an updated version of the article then.
The bedrock assumptions of the international family planning movement rested on a somewhat naive view that low birth rates, like those observed in developed countries like Japan, the United States, France, or Germany, reflected rational decisions by women based on informed economic knowledge about the relative costs and benefits of children. Specifically, that bringing up children was expensive in terms of time, commitment, and foregone alternatives. On the other hand, high birth rates, like those observed in Kenya and other developing countries, were often described as traditional, with an implicit judgment that such traditions were not rational and not in the best interests of women, their families, or their countries. Based on such judgments that traditions were not rational, the family planners believed that all that was needed to reduce high birth rates was education, again, particularly directed to women, to show them their own rational best interests and the dangers of too many children. Billboards provided a popular example, with an impoverished family living in misery among many children on the left, and a prosperous, comfortable, middle class family with just one or two children pictured on the right. The emphasis on education meant that Charlie Nam's expertise on education statistics moved to center stage in the agenda to educate women about the value of having fewer children. He could document for country after country that more education seemed to correlate with fewer children and smaller families. The rich were getting richer while the poor got babies. But Charlie had some warnings and caveats for the other scholars at these workshops, as he expressed them in this 1982 article from a subsequent meeting in Cairo, Egypt, which coincided with Egypt's completion of their version of the World Fertility Survey. First, there was the problem of whether education for women was a cause or perhaps only an effect of fewer births. Which was the cart and which was the horse pulling it? If fewer births resulted from some other social or economic process, then more formal schooling for women might just be a side effect of those deeper processes. Charlie pointed out that such other potential explanations had to be included in any research attempting to trace the links between birth rates and education.
There are various indicators of education in demographic research. Included are school enrollment or attendance rates, literacy rates, and years or levels of schooling reached. Each indicator measures part of the overall educational knowledge dimension. Some types of education are not included in any of the indicators cited. For example, technical training or adult education and the quality of educational offered. Past research on education and fertility may assume the direct effect of education, although intervening variables may contribute to the relationship. Also, the direction of relationship may be in question.
Even more importantly, his decades of education research led Charlie to emphasize at these workshops that what we usually think of as education, that is, students sitting in classrooms studying organized curricula, was only the tip of an iceberg of learning and cultural transmission that shape human attitudes, including those about having children.
It seemed to me that how one learns about how people evaluate the pros and cons of having children is based on various ways of learning. Formal education is one source, but interactions with others is another, and often more critical source. That led me to the classification in this article. The typology I developed has several dimensions. First, part of what we learn in life is specifically concerned with population matters. But part of what we learn in our everyday experiences is not specific to population related attitudes and behavior, but is indirectly related. Hence, we can distinguish between population specific learning and population relevant learning. A second distinction can be made according to whether the population specific or population relevant learning which takes place is structured learning in the sense that it has been planned for and organized, or is unstructured learning in the sense that it is spontaneous or haphazard. The intersection of these two dimensions results in four types of learning that relates to population behavior. And I can cite these types with examples. Type 1 is learning which is population relevant and structured, and this can include regular schooling on population relevant topics such as mathematics, social sciences, and the like. Also, it includes specialized classes in adult education. Type 2 is population relevant but unstructured, and that includes that which is learned in everyday interaction with others, that focuses on population items. Type 3, learning which is specific to population and structured, includes programs for family planning and health, as well as population education. And finally, type 4 is learning which is population specific but is unstructured. And included here are discussions with significant others about population topics, as well as such population topics that are mentioned in movies, plays, books, and the internet. Well, the term population socialization has been applied to the content of Type 4. It deals with all points in the life cycle, but focuses more attention on younger ages when cognitive and affective processes are being formed and when socialization has its greatest effects. The first systematic treatment of this area took place at the East-West Population Institute in Hawaii in the mid-1970s. Representatives of many Asian and Pacific countries were involved in that meeting. A review of the fertility socialization of young people showed three approaches. One, in which factors in the child's environment is related to family size preferences. A second, in which youngsters are asked where and how they got their family size ideas. And third, in which ideas about fertility topics are asked at the same time for both young persons and their mothers and are related to each other. A graduate student and I wrote an article on population socialization for the journal Population and Environment in 1980, which summarizes all of this.
Pretty much all the research then going on in the mid 20th century, as part of the global concern with rapid population growth, measured educational attainment in the simplest terms as numbers of years of formal schooling completed. The heart of this 1982 article emphasized that such superficial counting of years of formal education could not take into account what was included in the lessons being studied, and even more importantly, what was being learned by children and young adults in their wider lives in families, communities, and national cultures and economies. Charlie's hope and his advice was that international researchers should greatly widen their perspectives on what we include under the label of education and also how we measure it.
There's some few articles that have discussed further the notions of population socialization, for example, but I see no programs that tend to emphasize it. And I haven't pursued it, and I wished more attention was given to it. Now, I thought that when the East-West Population Institute had the conference drawing on Asian and Pacific members, that there would be more emphasis on population socialization in those countries, but I don't see any evidence of it yet.
The lack of much of any progress since 1982 in trying to measure and study a broader definition of learning goes hand in hand with the other limitations of the perspective dominating the thinking of family planning and Planned Parenthood activists. Just about the time that Charlie Nam was getting settled in Tallahassee, in 1967, Kingsley Davis already had published a skeptical warning that family planning programs did not address the underlying cultural context that rewarded women and families for having many children in traditional cultures, concentrating instead only on teaching them about technical methods for avoiding pregnancies. Contraceptives, Davis advised, are like airplane tickets. They're only useful if you want to get somewhere. Charlie Nam was still trying to warn the family planners 15 years later in this article that they were not paying enough attention to the unstructured, experiential learning that young adults encountered every day in their lives outside of schools, lives in which children could be economic resources rather than expensive costs, so that large families and many births could also be rational choices in some contexts. Ironically, to this day, some of the highest birth rates in the world still continue in countries like Kenya and Egypt, where Charles Namm sat down with other population scholars nearly half a century ago to try to address the issue of rapid world population growth.